and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. My grandparents used to live in an old house in South Texas that had been standing for around 100 years. They took good care of it as best they could. The house was old enough that something always needed attention. But they kept it comfortable and lived there for years without treating it as anything unusual. To us grandchildren, though, certain parts of the property felt much older and more frightening than the main house. The worst place was a large shed in the backyard. It was not a neat little storage building with labeled boxes and garden equipment arranged along the walls. It was packed with old junk, tools, pieces of furniture, containers, and things my grandparents had collected over the years. There was barely enough room to move around inside. Everything seemed piled on top of something else. Long tools leaned against the walls. Boxes were stacked in dark corners. Metal objects hung from nails or rested on shelves where they had probably remained for years. Even during the day, the shed was dark. It had one small screen window, but it did not let in enough light to make the inside feel safe. When you looked through it from outside, you could not see the room clearly. You saw only vague shapes. A hanging coat could look like a person. A shovel might become a thin arm. A pile of boxes could resemble someone crouching. All the grandchildren hated going near it. We convinced ourselves that the shed was haunted, although I do not remember anyone having a real supernatural experience there before this happened. It simply looked like the kind of place where something could hide. The screen window was the worst part. If you stood outside and looked through it, you could sense the darkness behind the mesh. But you could not tell whether anyone was looking back. My grandfather knew exactly how much the shed frightened us. He was an old prankster and enjoyed using that fear against us. Whenever he was inside searching for a tool or moving something, he sometimes watched for us passing through the backyard. If one of us walked close enough, he would suddenly shout through the screen. Sometimes he yelled our names. Other times he screamed, "Boo." His face might appear behind the dark mesh without warning. Every time we jumped or ran, he thought it was hilarious. We complained, but that probably only encouraged him. Because he played that trick so often, hearing his voice from the shed became normal. It was frightening, but it was familiar. If someone called from inside, we assumed it was Grandpa trying to scare us again. That is what happened when I was 11 years old. I was outside, near the shed, although I do not remember exactly what I had been doing. I may have been walking across the yard, playing, or heading toward the house. The day seemed ordinary. Other family members were around, and nothing had happened to make me nervous before I approached that part of the property. Then I heard my grandfather's voice from the screen window. It sounded clear and close. He called to me from inside the shed. I remember him saying, "Come into the shed." Then he laughed. The voice sounded exactly like my grandfather. It had the same tone he used whenever he tried to frighten us. The laugh was familiar, too. I did not hear a vague sound, and later decided it might have been him. At that moment, I believed he was standing inside the shed, watching me through the screen. Because he had played similar tricks before, I was more annoyed than frightened. I thought he was trying to make me walk closer so he could jump out or shout again. I answered him, "Grandpa, you can't scare me." I expected him to laugh again or say something else. I may have waited briefly, but I did not go into the shed. Instead, I turned toward the house. I wanted to prove that his prank had failed. I walked inside through the kitchen. From there, I continued into the living room. My grandfather was sitting inside the house. I stopped. For a moment, I could not understand what I was seeing. He was not coming in through another door or pretending he had rushed ahead of me. He was already there, relaxed and surrounded by the rest of the house. There was no realistic way he could have been inside the shed only seconds earlier. Called to me, then left the backyard and reached the living room before I did. I had taken the direct path. Even if another entrance existed, I should have heard him running or seen him enter. He also did not look out of breath or amused. I remember feeling the fear hit me all at once. If my grandfather was inside the living room, who had spoken to me from the shed? I began panicking. I told him what happened. I said someone had called me from the screen window using his voice and told me to come inside. At first, the adults may have assumed I was joking. My grandfather was known for scaring us from the shed, so they probably believed I was trying to turn one of his pranks back on him. But I was genuinely frightened. I kept insisting that I had heard him clearly. Several family members agreed to go outside and investigate. By then, part of me expected a cousin or another relative to come running from behind the shed, laughing about how they had fooled me. That would have been embarrassing, but it also would have been comforting. A prank was better than the alternative. We walked into the backyard. The shed looked exactly as it always did. Dark, crowded, still. Then we noticed the lock. The door was locked from the outside. No one could have entered through it and locked it again from inside. There was no person hiding in the shed. The small screen window was not large enough for an adult to climb through easily, and nothing suggested anyone had forced their way inside. The family opened or checked the shed and searched around it. There was nobody there. No cousin. No stranger. No one waiting behind the building. The piles of tools and junk remained undisturbed as far as anyone could tell. The adults decided I must have imagined the voice or made up the story. Some believed I was trying to scare them because my grandfather had scared us so many times. Perhaps they thought I wanted attention or was testing whether I could make the adults nervous. I continued telling them I was serious. I knew what my grandfather's voice sounded like. I had heard him speak from that exact window before. The person had not only called my name, he had told me to come into the shed and then laughed in the same way my grandfather laughed during his pranks. No one believed me completely. That made the experience worse. I was left with a memory that seemed impossible, and no adult willing to tell me what might have caused it. Over time, I began thinking about the possibility that someone had been trying to lure me into the shed. That explanation frightened me more than the idea of a ghost. The building was large enough for a person to hide among the tools and boxes. If a stranger had somehow entered earlier, they could have remained concealed for hours. They might have heard my grandfather frightening the grandchildren and learned how he spoke to us. Perhaps someone had been watching the family long enough to imitate him. When I passed the screen window, that person used the voice he knew I would trust. Come into the shed. If I had obeyed, I would have opened the door or asked someone for the key. Maybe the person expected it to be unlocked. Perhaps they wanted me to come close to the window. At 11 years old, I would have been easy to overpower. That thought stayed with me. But the locked door created a problem. If the shed was secured from the outside, how could anyone have been inside? The person might have entered before the door was locked. My grandfather or another family member could have closed the lock without checking whether the building was empty. Someone hiding among the clutter might have remained trapped until they found another way out. The shed may have had gaps, damaged boards, or another opening that children did not know about. Old buildings are rarely sealed perfectly. A thin adult or teenager might have squeezed through a loose panel or larger opening near the roof. They could have escaped while the family went inside to gather everyone. We did not perform a professional search. We only looked through a crowded shed. A person who knew how to hide might have remained unseen. That is possible. However, there were no reports of a stranger on the property. Nothing was stolen. No tools appeared disturbed. No one in the family saw someone running from the yard. If a would-be kidnapper had entered the shed, their plan depended on many unlikely conditions. They would need to know my grandfather's voice and habits. They would need to wait inside without being noticed. Then, they would have to escape from a locked structure after I alerted the entire family. It is not impossible, but there was no evidence. Another explanation is that one of my cousins or relatives imitated Grandpa as a joke. Children are capable of hiding, speaking through windows, and escaping before adults arrive. Someone could have crouched behind the shed rather than being inside it. The screen window and walls might have made the voice sound as though it came from within. After I entered the house, the prankster could have run away or mixed with the other family members before I returned. No one admitted doing it because the joke had frightened me more than expected. That is probably one of the strongest ordinary explanations. I do not remember exactly who was on the property or where every person had been at the time. A relative may have been close enough to imitate my grandfather. The family assumed I invented the story, so they may not have questioned everyone seriously. But the voice did not sound like a child pretending to be an old man. It sounded like Grandpa. I recognized his laugh. The words came from the window with the same confidence and teasing tone he always used. Perhaps expectation changed what I heard. Because I associated the shed with my grandfather's pranks, any male voice from that direction would have sounded like him. Someone could have said something less clear, and my mind translated it into familiar words. Maybe I heard, "Come into the shed," because that was the kind of thing I expected Grandpa to say. Memory can sharpen uncertain sounds after something frightening happens. At the exact moment, the voice might have been muffled or distant. After finding my grandfather inside, my mind may have replayed it as clearer than it really was. That is possible. The South Texas environment offered other natural explanations. Birds can imitate human sounds. Mockingbirds, mynas, crows, ravens, and other species can reproduce voices, whistles, laughter, and short phrases. A bird near the screen window might have copied something it heard my grandfather say many times. If Grandpa regularly shouted at us from the shed, an intelligent bird living nearby could have learned the pattern. It might have repeated part of his voice and followed it with a sound resembling laughter. That would explain why no person was inside. The voice could have come from the roof, a nearby tree, or behind the building, while appearing to come through the window. At 11, I may not have considered a bird capable of sounding so human. Even now, recordings of certain birds can be disturbingly convincing. Parrots and myna birds can reproduce complete phrases with the original rhythm and tone. I do not know whether any such bird lived near my grandparents' property. A mockingbird is common in Texas, but it is better known for copying other birds, alarms, and mechanical noises than reproducing an entire human sentence perfectly. Still, the sound may not have been as perfect as I remember. An echo is another possibility. Sound travels strangely around old houses, fences, metal sheds, and yards. My grandfather might have spoken from inside the house, and his voice could have traveled through an open window or doorway. The shed's metal or wooden surfaces may have reflected it toward me. I could have believed it came from the screen window because that was where he usually frightened us. He may have said something to another family member that sounded like, "Come into the shed." The laughter could have followed from a separate conversation. When I entered the living room and saw him, he was there because he had never been outside. That explanation would make the event an acoustic illusion. But the invitation felt directed at me. I remember responding because I believed he was looking at me through the window. Did I actually see a face behind the screen? I do not think so. I remember the voice more strongly than any shape. The window was always difficult to see through. I may have assumed someone was there without visually confirming it. That makes reflected sound more plausible. The old shed itself could have produced noises resembling speech. Metal shifting in the heat, tools rubbing together, wine through the screen, and animals moving among the clutter might create a series of sounds. Once my brain recognized my grandfather's voice, it formed a sentence. This phenomenon happens more often than people realize. Our minds search for language in random noise, especially when we expect a familiar person to speak. A creaking hinge in bird call can become a word. A rustle followed by a squeal can sound like laughter. But "come into the shed" is a specific sentence. It did not feel like an unclear sound I struggled to interpret. I heard the words immediately and answered them naturally. The experience has remained frightening because my reaction happened before I knew anything was wrong. I did not approach the shed hoping to hear a ghost. I was not thinking about kidnappers. I believed my grandfather was inside because the voice sounded ordinary. Only after I found him in the living room did the moment become impossible. There is also the possibility that my grandfather really was playing a trick and later denied it. He was known for pranks. Maybe he had found another route between the shed and house. Perhaps he called to me, then hurried inside through a back entrance while I was still crossing the yard. At 11, my sense of timing and distance may not have been accurate. What felt like only a few seconds may have been long enough for him to leave. The shed could have been locked by another family member after he exited. When I reached the living room, he may have been pretending to sit calmly, so the joke would become more frightening. The rest of the family could have joined the prank or simply failed to understand what he had done. This would fit his personality. But I remember the lock being outside, and he would have needed someone else to secure it after he left. More importantly, he never admitted the joke. A prankster usually enjoys revealing how the trick worked. My grandfather liked seeing us jump, but I do not believe he would have allowed me to spend years fearing that a stranger had tried to lure me into the shed. At least I hope he would not. The family's disbelief suggests they genuinely did not know what happened. They thought I was the one playing a joke. That left me alone with the darker possibilities. Sometimes I think the voice may have been something imitating my grandfather. Stories exist in many cultures about voices calling from forests, empty rooms, and isolated buildings. The voice often belongs to someone familiar. A parent calls a child from outside. A sibling speaks from an empty hallway. A dead relative whispers from another room. The purpose always seems to be drawing the listener closer. I did not know many of those stories when I was 11, but the experience fits them in a way that makes me uncomfortable. Whatever spoke did not only say my name, it gave me an instruction. Come into the shed. It wanted me to cross the yard, approach the dark building, and enter. The laugh afterward made it sound playful, exactly like my grandfather. If it had used an unfamiliar voice, I would have run. By using his, it almost worked. The only reason I did not enter was because I wanted to show him I was no longer scared of his prank. My stubbornness may have protected me. Instead of obeying, I told him he could not scare me and went into the house. If I had followed the voice, I do not know what I would have found. Maybe I would have discovered a bird perched inside. Perhaps a cousin would have jumped from behind a pile of tools. Maybe an intruder was hidden there. Or maybe I would have opened the door and found the shed empty, with a voice coming from deeper among the shadows. I am glad I never learned. The kidnapping theory remains the explanation that frightens me most, because it requires nothing supernatural. Old properties can be watched. Children can be targeted. A stranger could notice that the grandfather often called the grandchildren toward the shed and used the same method. The screen window allowed someone inside to see out without being seen clearly. The clutter provided hiding places. The size of the yard may have kept neighbors from noticing anything. If there was a person there, the situation was genuinely dangerous. The fact that the door was locked does not completely rule that out. But there were easier ways to approach a child than hiding in a packed shed and imitating an old man. No other attempt occurred. No stranger was found. None of the grandchildren reported a similar voice. A predator usually looks for repeated opportunities. This happened once and never developed into anything else. That makes a misunderstanding, prank, or unusual sound more likely. Still, one event is enough to leave a permanent fear. After that day, I avoided the shed whenever possible. My grandfather's jokes were no longer funny. If he shouted from the window again, I probably checked where he was before going closer. The darkness behind the screen seemed deeper because I knew a voice could come from it when the building was supposedly empty. Even during family gatherings, with adults and children all around, I felt uneasy near that part of the yard. The shed never changed. It remained full of junk and tools. The small screen window continued, showing only shadows. Nothing came out. No one discovered a hidden room, tunnel, or person living inside. Eventually, my grandparents moved away, or the family stopped using the property as often. The mystery stayed behind. As an adult, I try to judge the memory fairly. I was 11. The event happened quickly. I had been conditioned by years of my grandfather frightening us from the same location. Expectation could explain almost everything. I heard a sound. My brain labeled it as Grandpa. I filled in the familiar phrase and laugh. Then I found him inside and became frightened enough for the memory to become sharper and more dramatic. The shed door may not have been locked exactly as I remember, or someone could have secured it before we returned. Other family members may remember the incident differently. They believed I was trying to scare them, which suggests my behavior might have looked more playful or exaggerated than it felt from the inside. Memory is not perfect. But the central moment remains clear. I stood near the shed. My grandfather's voice came from the screen window. "Come into the shed." He laughed. I answered him. Then I walked through the kitchen and into the living room. My grandfather was already there. The fear did not come gradually. It struck the moment I saw him. I looked at the man in front of me and understood that the person I had just spoken to could not have been him. When the family searched, the shed was locked from the outside. No one was inside. To everyone else, it became a strange story told by a child. Some still believe I invented it. I have never been able to treat it as a joke. Maybe I nearly walked into a shed with a dangerous stranger hiding inside. Maybe a bird, echo, or family prank created the perfect imitation of my grandfather. Maybe something less ordinary knew exactly which voice would make an 11-year-old come closer. I cannot prove any of those explanations. I only know that I heard someone call me. The voice belonged to my grandfather. The words came from behind that dark screen. And when I went inside the house, the real man was sitting in the living room. The shed was still locked. Whatever asked me to enter had no way to be inside. But I have always been grateful that I did not listen. When I was 8 years old, in 1999, my mother and I saw something over a field in southeast Missouri that neither of us could explain. We were driving to my grandmother's house on Highway 49. I was sitting in the back seat, looking out the window while my mother drove. It was a familiar trip, and nothing about the day seemed unusual when we started. The road passed through heavily wooded areas, with trees growing close on both sides. For most of the drive, the view outside was broken up by trunks, branches, and shadows. Then we reached a long, straight section of road. It stretched for about a mile and came completely out of the tree line. On both sides were large open fields, probably 400 or 500 feet wide before the woods began again in the distance. The sudden openness made it easy to see far across the land. I was looking out the left side of the car when I noticed something floating above the field. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. It was silver and shaped like a saucer. It hovered around 150 feet above the field, although that was only my best guess. I was a child, and judging distance against an empty sky was difficult. The object was completely still. It was not traveling forward like an airplane. It did not drift with the wind like a balloon. There was no visible rope, cable, smoke, or support beneath it. It simply remained suspended in the air. Its general shape reminded me of the classic flying saucers shown in films and cartoons, but it was not completely flat or sharp around the edge. It did not look like two plates pressed together or a thin metal blade. The center appeared slightly thicker. Around the rim was a darker band. Even then, I noticed it. I could not tell whether that area was painted a darker color or whether it was only a shadow created by the shape of the craft. The sunlight reflected from the upper silver surface, while the edge remained noticeably darker. It did not seem extremely large. Because of the distance, its exact size was difficult to judge, but I estimated that it might have been about 30 feet across. It was much larger than a normal car, but smaller than a passenger airplane. I watched it for several seconds before speaking. At 8 years old, I did not immediately think about military aircraft, weather balloons, or experimental technology. I only knew that there was a silver object floating over the field where nothing should have been. I pointed toward it and told my mother to look. She turned her head enough to follow the direction of my hand. The moment she saw it, her whole reaction changed. She stared at the object in disbelief. I remember the expression on her face more than anything she said. She did not smile, laugh, or tell me it was an aeroplane. She looked frightened. My mother began to panic. She pressed the accelerator and increased our speed. The engine grew louder, and the car started moving much faster along the straight road. That was when the object began following us. It did not move directly over the road at first. It remained above the field to our left, keeping roughly the same altitude and distance from the car. As we accelerated, it matched our speed. I continued watching it through the same window. That detail is important to me. If the object had remained still over one location while we drove forward, it should have moved backward across my view and disappeared behind us. Instead, it stayed beside us. No matter how much speed my mother gained, the silver saucer remained visible from the same side of the car. It seemed to be moving parallel to the highway. There was no obvious turning, tilting, or engine movement. It did not point in the direction it traveled. The entire object simply moved sideways while remaining level. I do not remember hearing any sound from it. The car engine and road noise may have covered quieter sounds, especially with the windows closed, but there was no roar like a helicopter or low-flying plane. There was also no visible exhaust. The object kept pace with us in silence. The encounter probably lasted only about a minute, but as a child in the back seat, it felt much longer. I kept looking between the object and my mother. She held the steering wheel tightly and stared ahead, occasionally glancing toward the field. Her fear convinced me that what I was seeing was real. Children often misidentify objects in the sky, but my mother was an adult. She had seen aircraft, farm equipment, balloons, and ordinary vehicles before. Whatever she saw was unusual enough to make her speed down the highway. For most of that straight section, the craft followed us. The fields remained open on both sides, and the road ahead rose slightly toward a small hill. Beyond the hill, the highway entered the tree line again. I remember feeling that if we could reach the woods, we might be safe. The trees would block the view of the object, and perhaps it would stop following. We were almost at the end of the straight stretch when the craft suddenly changed its behavior. Until then, it had moved smoothly beside us, maintaining its height and distance. Then it accelerated. There was no gradual increase in speed. It went from matching the car to moving impossibly fast in an instant. The object shot forward and crossed over the road above us. I remember it passing over the car so quickly that I barely had time to follow it. It moved from the field on our left, directly overhead, and toward the right side of the highway. The movement was straight and controlled. It did not wobble or lose altitude. It simply launched across the sky. I turned and tried to keep watching through the other side of the car, but it disappeared against the tree line. One moment it was following us. The next, it was gone. The speed was unlike anything I had ever seen. Even fast aircraft usually remain visible for some time. They cross the sky over several seconds, and you can track their direction. This object covered the distance almost instantly. It felt as though it had been playing with us. It had allowed us to see it floating over the field. Then, when my mother tried to get away, it matched our speed. Just before the road returned to the trees, it demonstrated how easily it could overtake us. It crossed above the car and disappeared whenever it chose. After that, the rest of the drive was almost completely silent. I remained in the back seat, looking through the windows and trying to see whether the object would return. My mother focused on the road. She looked as though she was trying to understand what had just happened. Neither of us had an explanation. I do not remember her telling me to forget it or warning me not to talk about it. I also do not remember a long conversation in the car. The silence itself stayed with me. Normally, after something surprising happened, a parent would explain it. She might say it was a plane, helicopter, balloon, or reflection. My mother did not offer any of those answers. She seemed as confused as I was. For years afterward, I replayed the sighting in my mind. I wondered whether I had exaggerated parts of it because I was only 8 years old. Maybe the object was farther away than I believed. Maybe it was much larger and only appeared small because of the distance. Perhaps it was not following us at all. When a person watches a distant object from a moving car, perspective can create strange illusions. A faraway object may seem to remain beside the vehicle because it shifts very little against the background. The moon often appears to follow cars for that reason. A distant water tower, balloon, or aircraft could seem to keep the same position for several minutes. That explanation could account for part of the experience. If the object was much farther away than I thought, our movement along the road might not have changed its position noticeably. The open field provided few nearby objects for comparison, making the distance difficult to judge. But my mother accelerated after seeing it. She believed it was close enough and strange enough to be dangerous. The final movement also remains difficult to explain as perspective. The object did not slowly disappear behind trees as the road curved. It crossed from the left side of the road to the right, passing over us at an incredible speed. My viewpoint changed from the left window to overhead, and then toward the right tree line. That seemed like real movement, not an illusion caused by the car. A small aeroplane is one possible explanation. From a distance, the wings and body of a plane can blend into a rounded shape, especially when viewed from the front or side. The darker rim could have been the underside of the wings. If the aircraft turned while approaching us, it might appear to accelerate suddenly and pass overhead. But I saw no wings, tail, propeller, or navigation lights. The object looked smooth and circular. It also seemed to hover, without moving before we approached. A plane cannot remain completely still in the air. Strong headwinds might make an aircraft appear stationary from one angle, but it would still need to maintain forward flight, and the sound should have been noticeable when it crossed overhead. A helicopter could hover. It could also follow a road and then pass over the car. That is one of the most reasonable possibilities. At a distance, the rotor blades might have been difficult to see, and the body could have looked rounded. The dark band around the edge might have been the shadow beneath the rotor. But a helicopter flying only around 150 feet above a field would have been loud. We should have heard the blades before it crossed the road. The object also did not have the uneven movement of a hovering helicopter. It appeared perfectly stable. When it accelerated, it moved much faster than any helicopter I knew. A weather balloon is another possible explanation. Some weather or research balloons carry metallic equipment beneath them, and sunlight can make them appear silver. A balloon could float over a field in silence, but it would move with the wind rather than match a speeding car exactly. It could not suddenly shoot over the road and disappear at high speed unless strong wind affected it, and even then, the change would not be instantaneous. A military aircraft or experimental vehicle is harder to rule out. There may have been technology being tested in the region that ordinary people did not recognize. The United States military has developed unusual aircraft for decades, some of which remain secret until years later. A circular or disc-shaped prototype might explain why it looked unlike a normal plane. Highway 49 may have been near a training route or testing area I knew nothing about. But experimental aircraft still have to obey physical limitations. They produce sound, heat, and air movement. A 30-foot object passing low over a moving car should have been noticeable in more ways than sight alone. It also seems reckless to test secret equipment directly above a public highway where drivers could easily see it. A blimp or advertising balloon might have had a silver surface and dark rim. From the side, it could look disc-shaped, but a blimp would be much larger and slower. It could not move the way this object did. A reflection in the car window is another explanation I have considered. Light from inside the vehicle or another car could have created a silver shape on the glass. As our position changed, the reflection might appear to remain beside us. When I moved my head or the road rose, it could shoot across my view and disappear. But my mother saw the object too. She was looking through a different window and from a different angle. A reflection visible to me in the back seat would not appear in the same location to her unless it came from a large source inside the car. There was no object in the vehicle shaped like a silver saucer. The sighting also happened in daylight, making a strong interior reflection less likely. Some kind of optical effect in the atmosphere may have created a false image. Mirages can make distant objects appear to float, stretch, or move strangely. Temperature layers over open fields sometimes distort the view, especially near the horizon. A distant aircraft could have appeared larger, closer, or more stationary than it really was. When the atmospheric conditions changed, the image might have shifted rapidly. That possibility could explain the strange shape and movement without requiring an unknown craft. But the object was high enough above the field that it did not resemble the usual shimmering mirages seen near hot roads. It looked solid. The silver surface had a clear, darker rim. I watched it continuously for most of the encounter. It did not flicker, stretch, or dissolve. My mother's reaction again matters. She did not see a vague distortion. She saw something that caused her to accelerate immediately. Perhaps the strongest natural explanation is that we saw a normal aircraft under unusual viewing conditions, and fear changed our perception. I was 8, and my mother's panic influenced me. When she sped up, I may have assumed the object was following, even if it remained in one place. When it passed overhead, the combination of our movement, a curve or hill in the road, and the aircraft changing direction could have made it seem impossibly fast. Memory may also have intensified the speed over the years. An event that lasted several seconds can become nearly instantaneous in recollection. The size and altitude estimates may be wrong too. Without a known object beside it, I had no reliable scale. What I remember as a 30-foot craft at 150 feet could have been a much larger object several miles away. I accept all those possibilities. I know childhood memories are not perfect. Details can change each time a story is remembered or retold. The exact color of the sky, the amount of traffic, and the shape of the fields may no longer be accurate. But certain parts have remained unchanged. The silver saucer was over the left field. It stayed completely still at first. The edge was darker than the center. I pointed it out to my mother. She saw it and panicked. She accelerated. The object kept pace beside us. Then it passed over the car and shot toward the right side of the road. Those details have stayed clear for years. The darker rim became especially important to me later. At the time, I assumed it was either a painted stripe or shadow. But after thinking about the event repeatedly, another possibility entered my mind. What if the dark band was made of windows? If the object was around 30 feet wide, a row of dark windows around the rim would have made sense. The silver upper and lower surfaces could surround a central section where something inside might look out. That idea disturbed me more than the craft itself. Until then, I had imagined the object as a machine. Maybe it was unmanned. Maybe it was some strange piece of technology controlled from far away. But if the dark rim contained windows, then the object might have had occupants. While I watched it from the back seat, something could have been watching me from the other side. The craft remained beside our car for almost the entire straight stretch. It had every opportunity to leave. Instead, it matched us. Perhaps it was observing the vehicle. Maybe it was interested in my mother's reaction when she accelerated. The sudden pass overhead could have been a final look before it disappeared. Of course, the darker area may have been nothing more than shadow. A curved metal object would naturally have a dark underside. The sun could strike the top while leaving the edge unlit. There is no evidence that any windows existed. My mind added that possibility years later because I wanted to understand the shape. Still, once I thought of it, I could not stop. I pictured faces or eyes behind the dark band. I imagined something inside, looking down at the road, noticing a child pointing through the window. Maybe the craft followed because I had seen it. Perhaps it wanted to know whether we would stop. My mother's decision to accelerate may have changed what happened next. If she had pulled over, would the object have come closer? Would it have remained over the field? Would it have landed? I am grateful we never found out. There were no cell phones with cameras ready in our hands in 1999. Even if my mother had owned a basic mobile phone, it would not have recorded clear video. I was an 8-year-old child in the back seat. My only response was to watch. My mother's priority was driving us away. We did not stop to take photographs or look for other witnesses. I do not know whether anyone in another car saw it. The road may have been empty during that minute, or other drivers may have been too far away. Farmers or residents near the fields could have seen it without reporting anything. There may have been local news stories or official records, but we never searched for them. At the time, access to information was different. We could not immediately search online for sightings in southeast Missouri. The experience remained private. I have sometimes wondered whether my mother remembers it exactly the same way. I have not always wanted to ask. Shared memories can become influenced by discussion. If I repeat all the details first, she may agree because they sound familiar rather than because she independently remembers them. The best confirmation would be for her to describe the event without hearing my version. Even without that, I know she reacted in the car. I did not imagine her pressing the accelerator and staring at the field. Her fear became part of the event. The rest of the drive was quiet, because both of us were trying to process the same thing. If I had been alone, I could dismiss the sighting as a child's mistake. My mother's presence prevents me from doing that completely. She may have misidentified the same aircraft I did, but something real was there for both of us to see. The event did not lead to any later strange experiences. We were not followed home. No unexplained people came to the house. I did not have dreams about being taken or discover missing time. The sighting lasted about a minute and ended when the object disappeared over the trees. That makes the experience feel more like an accidental observation than a personal encounter. We happened to reach the open section of Highway 49 while something was above the field. For a short time, our paths crossed. Then, it left. I do not claim that it came from another planet. Unidentified only means we could not identify it. The object could have had a military, scientific, or natural explanation. I was a child, and my ability to judge size, height, and speed was limited. But I also know what a plane looked like. I knew what a helicopter was. The object did not resemble either one. It looked like a silver saucer with a dark band around the rim. It hovered without movement. Then it traveled beside our car. Finally, it accelerated beyond anything I could understand. The image of it crossing overhead remains one of the clearest memories from my childhood. I remember turning in the back seat, trying to keep it in view. For a fraction of a second, the silver shape was above the road. Then it moved toward the right side tree line and disappeared. There was no fading point in the distance. It was simply there, then gone behind the trees. My mother kept driving. I remained at the window. Neither of us spoke much. Even after the familiar roads returned and we continued toward my grandmother's house, the silence stayed between us. We had seen something that did not belong in the sky we knew. Maybe one day an aircraft will be revealed that matches it perfectly. Perhaps someone will explain the illusion created by a distant helicopter and a moving car. I would accept a normal answer. I have never needed the object to be extraterrestrial. I only need an explanation that fits everything we saw. So far, I have not found one. Whenever I think back to that long open section of Highway 49, I first see the fields and the silver shape floating above them. Then I remember my mother's face. She saw it. She panicked. She tried to outrun it. The object stayed beside us, as though the car's speed meant nothing. At the end of the straight road, it passed overhead and vanished into the trees. But the detail that returns most often is still that darker band around the edge. Maybe it was only shadow. I hope it was. Because if those dark sections were windows, then while I sat in the back seat, staring up at the saucer, something inside may have been staring directly back at me. I once had a babysitting experience that still makes me uncomfortable whenever I think about it. The little girl I was watching was around 3 years old at the time. She was normally easy to babysit, especially if I put on one of her favorite movies. That night, we were sitting together on the couch watching Tangled. It was the movie she always wanted to see, and I knew it would keep her quiet and occupied. She sat beside me with her pacifier in her mouth, completely focused on the screen. Her cat was also on the couch with us. I was petting it with one hand while occasionally texting my friends with the other. Everything about the evening should have felt normal and safe. But the weather outside was terrible. It was raining extremely hard, and the house felt much darker than usual. Water hit the roof and windows constantly, and the storm made every small noise inside seem louder. The movie gave the room some light, but most of the house beyond the living room was dark. I have always been easy to scare, so I was already feeling nervous before anything happened. I kept reminding myself that I was inside a familiar house with a child and a cat. There was no reason to be afraid. Still, the way the couch was positioned did not help. I was sitting with my back facing an open corner of the room. There was no wall directly behind me, so anyone coming from another part of the house could stand there without entering my line of sight. I hated that feeling. Every now and then, I imagined movement behind me or thought I heard something beneath the rain. Each time, I told myself it was only the house settling, water running through the gutters, or the storm outside. The little girl did not seem bothered. She continued watching Tangled as if nothing else existed. The bright colors and music filled the room, and for a while I began relaxing. The cat was calm beneath my hand. Then it suddenly stiffened. The change happened so quickly that I noticed it immediately. One moment, the cat was relaxed and allowing me to pet it. The next, every muscle in its body seemed tense. Its head lifted, its ears turned toward the space behind me. It stared over my shoulder. At almost the exact same moment, the little girl removed the pacifier from her mouth. She raised her hand and pointed behind me. Then she asked, "Who's that?" My entire body went cold. I did not turn around immediately. The fact that both the child and the cat had reacted at the same time made it impossible to dismiss as only my imagination. The girl was not looking toward the television. She was staring past me. The cat was focused on the same area. I had the sudden, terrible feeling that someone was standing directly behind the couch. For a second, I sat completely still. My mind began searching for ordinary explanations. Maybe one of the girl's parents had returned early. Perhaps another family member was inside the house and had entered quietly. Someone could have walked into the room without me hearing them because of the heavy rain in the movie. But I had not heard a door open. No one had called out. The child's expression did not look happy or familiar. She was not smiling, as if she had seen her mother or father. She looked confused. I forced myself to turn around. There was nothing there. The open corner behind the couch was empty. No person stood in the room. No shadow moved along the wall. There was no coat hanging from a chair or object that could obviously be mistaken for someone. I checked the doorway and the darker part of the room beyond it. Nothing moved. I felt a small amount of relief, but the cat and child were still watching the same place. I turned back toward the girl and tried to act calm. I did not want her to know how frightened I was. If I panicked, she might begin crying, and I would then have to calm both her and myself. So I smiled as naturally as I could and said, "Don't worry, there's nothing there." I hoped she would accept the answer and return to the movie. Instead, her eyes widened. She pointed behind me again. "No," she said. "Look, who is that behind you?" The fear became much stronger. Her voice did not sound playful. She was not laughing or trying to scare me. At 3 years old, she was too young to understand how effective that kind of prank would be, especially with the cat reacting beside her. She seemed genuinely confused that I could not see what she saw. I looked behind me again. The corner remained empty. I stared longer this time. I checked the floor, walls, and doorway. I looked for anything that might create a human-shaped shadow. Lightning or headlights could have caused something to move across the room, but the shape would have disappeared when the light changed. The girl continued staring at one specific location. The cat's eyes remained fixed there, too. I could feel myself beginning to panic. I did not want to stand up, because that would mean moving closer to whatever might be behind me. At the same time, remaining on the couch with my back exposed felt unbearable. I kept telling the girl there was nobody there. My voice probably sounded less convincing each time. She looked past me for another moment. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The girl lowered her hand. Her expression became normal. She put the pacifier back into her mouth and turned toward the television. The cat relaxed at almost the same time. Its body softened, its ears returned to their usual position, and it stopped staring behind me. Within seconds, both of them behaved as if nothing had happened. The little girl continued watching Tangled. She did not ask another question. She did not seem frightened or curious about whoever she thought she had seen. It was as though she had forgotten the entire exchange. That sudden change frightened me almost as much as the original reaction. If she had misunderstood a shadow or object, I expected her to keep looking at it. If someone had walked away, I might have heard movement or seen them leave. Instead, the attention of both the child and cat ended at the same moment. Whatever had been holding their focus seemed to be gone. I remained tense on the couch. I tried to keep watching the movie, but I could no longer concentrate. The open corner behind me felt like a dark space where something could reappear without warning. I kept turning around to check. Each time, the area was empty. The storm continued outside. Rain struck the windows and roof, and occasionally the wind made part of the house creak. Every sound seemed like someone moving through another room. I considered taking the girl somewhere else in the house, but I did not want to leave the living room and walk through the dark hallways. The television was our main source of light and noise. I also did not want to ask the child more questions. Part of me was curious. I wanted to know what she had seen. Was it a man or woman? Did she recognize the person? Were they standing or sitting? What did they look like? But asking might make her look behind me again. I was afraid she would describe something I could not forget. At 3 years old, her explanation might also have been difficult to understand. She could have said something vague that would only make the situation worse. So I left it alone. I kept her close beside me and continued petting the cat once it settled down. I did not feel safe, but I tried to act as though everything was normal. Eventually, I became frightened enough to call my mother. I needed to hear the voice of an adult I trusted. I told her what had happened as quietly as possible, so the little girl would not notice how scared I was. I explained that the cat had suddenly stared behind me, and that the child had pointed at the same place and asked who was there. My mother probably tried to reassure me. There were plenty of ordinary possibilities. The cat may have heard an insect, mouse, or sound inside the wall. Cats can detect movement and noises that humans miss. The little girl might have noticed the cat staring and assumed someone was behind me. Children often copy the reactions of animals or adults. If the cat looked alarmed, she may have followed its gaze and imagined a person. That is a reasonable explanation. The sequence may not have been as simultaneous as it felt. Perhaps the cat stiffened first. The girl noticed it looking over my shoulder. Then she pointed and asked, "Who's that?" Because she assumed the cat saw someone. At the time, however, their reactions seemed to happen together. I do not remember the child looking at the cat before pointing. She appeared to see something herself. Another possibility is that the television created a reflection or moving shadow behind me. Tangled contains bright scenes and sudden color changes. The light from the screen could have projected shapes onto a wall, window, or piece of furniture. The child may have interpreted one of those shapes as a person. The cat could have noticed the same movement. When the scene changed, the shadow disappeared, and both returned their attention to the movie. That explanation fits the sudden beginning and ending. A 3-year-old can easily see faces or people in random shapes. The cat might react to the movement without believing it was human. I may have looked behind me after the image had already changed, which would explain why I saw nothing. The storm could also have contributed. Lightning may have briefly illuminated someone or something outside a window, casting a shadow into the room. A tree branch moving in the wind might create the outline of a person. The child and cat could both have tracked the movement until it disappeared. Because my back was toward the corner, I would not have seen the original flash. By the time I turned, the room had returned to normal. That is probably one of the strongest natural explanations. But the little girl did not say, "What is that?" She asked, "Who's that?" She seemed certain she was looking at a person. When I told her nobody was there, she became more insistent. "No, look, who is that behind you?" The words suggested that whatever she saw remained there while I turned around. She could not understand why I denied it. Children sometimes invent imaginary people, but this girl had never mentioned an imaginary friend to me. Even if she had one, the cat's reaction would still need explanation. The cat might have heard something unrelated at the exact same time. Coincidences happen. A mouse could move inside the wall while a child imagined a person behind the couch. Because the two events happened together, I connected them. That may be all it was. I also wonder whether someone could have been outside the house. The child might have seen a person through a window behind me. From her lower position on the couch, she may have had a different viewing angle. I turned around and looked inside the room, not through every window or glass surface. If someone stood outside briefly and then moved away, the girl could have followed them with her eyes. The cat might have smelled or heard the same person. That explanation is frightening, but it does not require anything supernatural. However, the girl pointed directly behind me, not toward a window as far as I remember. The corner appeared to be where her attention rested. There was no obvious place for a person to stand without being visible to me. Maybe she saw my shadow. The room's lighting could have projected my silhouette onto a wall behind the couch. When I moved, the shadow moved too. At 3 years old, she might have thought it was another person. But she had been sitting beside me for some time and had likely seen the shadow before. The cat would also have little reason to become tense over it unless the shape moved suddenly. Another possibility is that I misremembered the cat's behavior because the child's question frightened me. Perhaps the cat only looked behind me normally. Once the girl asked who was there, I interpreted the cat's posture as fear. Memory changes under stress. The stiffness, timing, and shared focus may have become stronger each time I retold the story. At the time, however, the cat's reaction was the first thing I noticed. It was what made the child's words so terrifying. Animals are often treated as evidence in strange stories because people believe they can sense things humans cannot. In reality, cats react to many ordinary signals we fail to notice. They hear high-frequency sounds, detect small movements, and smell animals through walls or windows. The cat may have been tracking something completely real, but too small or quiet for me to detect. An insect could have flown through the corner. A mouse might have moved behind the wall. A pipe could have shifted. The child may have seen the cat watching and created her own explanation. That is far more likely than a ghost standing behind me. I understand that. But I still remember the child's face. Her eyes widened when I said there was nothing there. She did not look at me as though she wanted to scare me. She looked frustrated that I was refusing to acknowledge someone obvious. It was as if an adult had stood behind the couch, and I kept pretending the room was empty. Then she snapped out of it. There was no gradual loss of interest. She simply put the pacifier back into her mouth and returned to the movie. The cat relaxed, too. I do not remember either of them looking toward the corner again that night. Nothing else happened before the parents returned. No doors opened. No footsteps crossed the house. The television did not switch off, and no object moved. The experience lasted only a few seconds. That makes it easy to explain as a misunderstanding. It also makes it impossible to investigate. If something had continued, I could have turned on more lights, checked the house, or called someone to come over. Instead, the moment ended before I could understand it. The house remained dark and ordinary. The little girl seemed completely fine. I was the only one who stayed afraid. I do not remember telling her parents everything when they came home. I may have mentioned it casually, or I may have been too embarrassed. Babysitters are expected to remain calm and responsible. Admitting that a 3-year-old and a cat frightened me badly enough to call my mother might have made me sound incapable of watching her. There was also nothing practical for the parents to investigate. Their daughter pointed at an empty corner. That was all. Children say strange things constantly. They talk to invisible people, misunderstand reflections, and confuse dreams with reality. Most parents would not consider it unusual. Maybe she had seen a family member standing there on another day and briefly imagined them in the same place. A memory could have overlapped with the room. Perhaps she was tired and entering a dreamlike state while still watching the movie. Young children can shift between imagination and reality very easily. She may have genuinely believed someone was behind me, then forgotten the thought seconds later. That would explain her sudden return to normal. The cat remains the part that prevents me from fully accepting that answer. If only the child had reacted, I would blame imagination. If only the cat had stared, I would assume an animal or sound was nearby. Together, they made the empty space feel occupied. I have thought about whether I should have stood up immediately and moved across the room. Perhaps something was positioned so close behind me that my turning head did not bring it into view. Maybe it moved with me, remaining just outside my line of sight. That idea is probably created by fear rather than logic. There was no reason to think anything was physically hiding there. Still, the couch placement made the moment especially effective. My back was open. I could not see the space unless I turned my whole body. The little girl and cat had a clear view over my shoulder. They were watching something in the one place I could not naturally see. Sometimes I wonder what the girl would say if she were asked about it now. She was so young that she almost certainly would not remember. Even if she did, the memory would have changed over time. She might describe a relative, shadow, or imaginary character. There is no way to recover exactly what she believed she saw. The cat cannot tell anyone what caught its attention. I am left with only my own perspective. A dark house, heavy rain, Tangled playing on the television, a calm cat under my hand, then its body becoming rigid. A small child removing her pacifier and pointing behind me. Who's that? I turned. Nothing, I tried to reassure her. She stared past me with even wider eyes. No, look, who is that behind you? Then everything returned to normal. I know the likely explanation is that the cat noticed something ordinary and the child followed its attention. Maybe a moving shadow from the television resembled a person. Perhaps lightning projected a shape into the corner. The storm, darkness, and my existing nervousness made the incident feel more threatening than it was. Those explanations are reasonable. I repeat them whenever the memory returns. But I also remember how quickly the cat stiffened. I remember the certainty in the child's voice. Neither one looked randomly around the room. They focused on the exact same place. Whatever they saw or heard seemed to be standing behind me. I looked twice and never saw anything. That should make me feel better. Instead, it has always made the story worse. Maybe there was never anyone there. Maybe a 3-year-old's imagination and a cat's hearing happened to overlap for a few seconds. But on that stormy night, while I sat with my back to an open corner, both of them watched something I could not see. Then, at the same moment, they stopped. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, some of my cousins came to visit us from Colorado. We lived far out in the middle of nowhere, so having family stay with us was a big deal. There were not many other children nearby, and visits gave us someone new to play with besides our brothers and sisters. One of my cousins was close to my age. At some point during the visit, I told him I wanted to show him some toys I kept in the basement. The basement was not a place I enjoyed entering alone. There was nothing obviously wrong with it. It was part storage area, part computer room, and part general space for things that did not fit upstairs. But the layout made it frightening to me as a child. The light switch was located at the bottom of the staircase instead of at the top. That meant anyone going down had to enter the dark basement before they could turn the lights on. The stairs were also open on one side. As you descended, you slowly gained a view of the basement beside and below you. There was no enclosed stairwell protecting you from the darkness. You could see into the room before reaching the switch, and anything standing down there could see you coming. Normally, I handled this by running. I would stand at the top, build up enough courage, then rush down the stairs and hit the switch as quickly as possible. I did not stop halfway or look into the basement. I knew there was probably nothing down there, but knowing that did not make the darkness feel harmless. On that day, however, my cousin was with me. I did not want him to think I was afraid. At 9 or 10 years old, looking brave in front of another kid mattered. I did not want to sprint down the steps or admit that the basement made me nervous. So instead of making my usual mad dash, I tried to act calm. I started walking down slowly. My cousin followed behind or beside me. The basement was completely dark except for a faint glow coming from somewhere ahead. At first, I assumed the light came from the computer. As we moved lower, more of the room became visible. The computer was on. Its screen cast a weak light across the desk and nearby furniture. That was strange by itself because no one was supposed to be downstairs. Everyone in the house was upstairs with the visiting family. But what frightened me was the office chair in front of the computer. Someone was sitting in it. The figure was dark because the overhead lights were still off. The glow from the monitor was not strong enough to reveal a face or clothing. All I could see was the shape of a person seated in the chair. For a second, I thought it might be one of our dads. Maybe an adult had come downstairs before us and was using the computer without turning on the light. but I had just come from upstairs. As far as I knew, everyone was there. My cousin saw the person too. Neither of us had time to ask who it was. As we continued down far enough to see into the room, the figure turned in the chair. It looked toward us. I could not see eyes or a face. I only saw the head and upper body rotate in our direction. That movement was enough. My cousin and I turned and ran up the stairs as fast as we could. Any attempt I had made to look brave disappeared immediately. We pushed past each other, grabbing at the railing and climbing toward the light upstairs. I do not remember whether the figure stood up or followed us. I did not look back. I expected to hear footsteps on the stairs behind us. I imagined a hand reaching through the open side and grabbing one of us before we reached the top. Nothing touched us. We ran into the room where our fathers and the rest of the family were gathered. Both of us were frightened and talking at once. We told them someone was sitting at the computer in the basement. We explained that the lights were off, the computer was on, and a dark figure had turned to look at us. The adults did not believe us. Everyone was upstairs. No family member admitted using the computer. There was also no normal entrance into the house through the basement. Someone could not simply open an exterior door downstairs and walk in. As far as the adults were concerned, there was no way for an unknown person to be sitting there. They probably believed we had frightened each other. Two children entered a dark basement, saw the office chair and computer equipment, and mistook the shadows for a person. Once one of us ran, the other followed. That would have been the obvious explanation. One or more adults may have gone downstairs to check. I do not remember the search clearly. What I remember is that no one was found. The basement was empty. There was no stranger hiding behind furniture or in a storage area. The chair may not even have been positioned the way we remembered by the time the adults looked. Nothing was missing, and there were no signs that anyone had entered. The experience became one strange childhood memory. For years, I thought of it as the only possibly paranormal thing that ever happened in that house. We did not have repeated sightings of dark figures. There were no voices calling our names or objects flying across rooms. The basement did not develop a reputation for being haunted. Nothing similar happened to me there again. That made it easier to dismiss. Maybe the chair had been turned partly sideways, and the high back looked like a person's body. A coat, blanket, or pile of clothing might have been draped over it. The glow from the monitor could have created a head-shaped shadow. As we moved down the stairs, our angle changed, making the figure appear to turn. A computer screensaver could have shifted from a dark image to a brighter one, changing the shadow on the chair at exactly the wrong moment. Children often see human shapes in random objects, especially in darkness. Our brains are designed to recognize faces and bodies quickly. That ability protects us, but it also causes mistakes. A coat on a chair becomes a seated man. A lamp and curtain become a person standing by a window. In a basement I already feared, my mind may have been ready to see someone. My cousin's presence does not completely rule that out. We were looking at the same group of objects from nearly the same position. If the chair and shadows resembled a person, both of us could have made the same mistake. One child may have gasped or moved first, causing the other to interpret the shape the same way. Memory can also become shared through retelling. Maybe I said, "Someone sitting there," and my cousin accepted it before seeing clearly. By the time we reached the adults, both of us believed the figure had turned toward us. That is a reasonable explanation. But I remember the movement. It did not feel like a shadow changing as we walked. The figure appeared to notice us. It turned because we had reached the point where it could see us on the stairs. That sense of awareness was what made us run. For a long time, I treated the incident as something unexplained, but probably harmless. Then I remembered another event from the same period. Our house was isolated, but we still experienced disturbing incidents involving real people. Someone tried to break into the property more than once. There was also a peeping Tom. My sister saw a man looking through her bedroom window. That alone was frightening. We lived far from busy roads and crowded neighborhoods, so a stranger had no innocent reason to be standing outside a child's window. The isolation that usually made the property feel private also meant someone could move around without being noticed by neighbors. For years, I remembered the peeping Tom as a separate incident. Then, while thinking about the basement story, something suddenly connected in my mind. My cousins had been visiting when my sister saw the man outside her window. It happened during that same trip. That realization gave me chills. If a stranger was moving around the property while family was visiting, maybe the figure in the basement had not been paranormal. Maybe someone had entered the house. The adults believed there was no way to access the basement from outside. But old or isolated homes are not always as secure as people think. There may have been a window, crawl space, utility opening, or door that a determined person could use. Even if the basement had no obvious entrance, someone could have entered through the main floor earlier and hidden downstairs. With so many visiting family members, it might have been easier for a stranger to move unnoticed. Doors could be left unlocked. People came in and out. Adults assumed unfamiliar sounds came from guests. A person hiding in the basement might remain there while everyone gathered upstairs. That possibility is more frightening to me than a ghost. If the figure was human, it was sitting in the darkness watching the computer while a house full of people remained only one floor above. When my cousin and I appeared on the stairs, it turned toward us. It did not call out or identify itself. It did not turn on the lights. It simply watched us run. Maybe the person left while we were telling our parents. The adults may have spent several minutes dismissing the story before anyone checked. That would have given the intruder time to hide or escape through the same route used to enter. The basement may have contained enough furniture, boxes, or storage areas to conceal someone during a quick family search. No one expected to find a real stranger. They may have looked around briefly, laughed at us, and returned upstairs. A person hiding behind something could have waited until the house became quiet. The peeping Tom incident suggests someone was at least willing to approach the house and watch the people inside. Could it have been the same man? There is no proof. The events happening during the same visit might be coincidence. I do not remember the exact day or whether they occurred only hours apart. Childhood memories often compress several days into one period. The peeping Tom may have appeared before or after the basement sighting, even if both happened while my cousins were staying. But the connection is possible. Maybe the man watched the house from outside, saw many people arrive, and became curious. Perhaps he entered through an unsecured window. He could have used the computer or only sat near it because the screen provided light. Then 2 children came down and surprised him. If he was the kind of person who looked through my sister's window, there is no way to know what he wanted. He may have been a burglar searching for valuables. He may have been watching children. He may have had no clear plan at all. The idea that my cousin and I came within a few steps of a real intruder makes the memory much worse. We were walking slowly because I wanted to look brave. If we had continued toward the switch instead of running, we would have entered the room with him. The light switch was at the bottom of the stairs. To turn it on, one of us would have needed to move even closer to the office chair. We had no phone, weapon, or adult nearby. The open staircase left us fully visible. The figure may have been waiting to see what we would do. Running immediately could have protected us. But the human explanation also has problems. Why was the computer on? If a stranger had entered secretly, turning on a computer would create light that could reveal their presence. The machine might have already been running, of course. Someone in the family could have left it on. The figure may have chosen the chair because it was available, not because they were using the computer. Why did the adults find no evidence? A person sitting in the chair would likely disturb dust, move objects, or leave a door or window unsecured. But families do not usually examine a room for forensic evidence after children report seeing a shadow. Small signs could easily be missed. The figure also may not have been human at all. The timing of the peeping Tom might make me reinterpret an unrelated visual mistake. Once I remembered a real stranger had been near the house. My mind connected the two because the connection created a complete story. People naturally search for patterns. Two frightening memories from the same trip feel related even when they may have different causes. The peeping Tom could have been one person outside. The basement figure could have been a chair and shadows. There is no need for them to be connected. That is probably the safest conclusion. I have also wondered whether the peeping Tom was ever identified. If the family caught or recognized him, maybe he could be ruled out as the basement figure. I do not remember an arrest or explanation. My sister only saw a man looking through her window. He disappeared before anyone could stop him. If he was never found, the possibility remains open. The isolated location made incidents like that especially unsettling. People often imagine that living in the country is safer because fewer strangers pass by. But isolation can work both ways. There are fewer witnesses. A person can park farther away and approach through fields or trees. They can watch a house without neighbors noticing. If someone wanted to break in or look through windows, our property may have offered privacy. We already knew people had tried to enter before. The adults may have believed the basement was secure, but someone determined enough might find a weakness they did not know existed. The phrase, "there was no way in," depends on the family knowing every possible route. Old houses sometimes have coal chutes, drainage openings, basement windows, or loose panels. A child may not know about them. Even an adult may overlook a damaged lock or opening hidden behind bushes. Maybe the figure entered through another part of the house while a door was temporarily open. Visiting relatives create confusion. A stranger could even pretend to belong there for a few moments if the family was large enough. That seems unlikely, but not impossible. There is another possibility. And perhaps one of the adults had been downstairs shortly before us and left the computer running. The chair may still have been rotating slowly after they stood up. When we reached the point where we could see into the basement, the chair turned because of momentum. A coat or dark shape on it looked like a person. That would explain the movement perfectly. An office chair can rotate with very little force. If it was slightly unbalanced or the floor sloped, it could turn on its own. The computer light behind it would create a dark outline. From the stairs, we might see the back of the chair as shoulders and a head. Then the chair rotated and appeared to look at us. This may be the most reasonable physical explanation. It accounts for why no person was found and why both of us saw the same movement. The figure was real in the sense that a chair and objects created it, but it was not alive. The problem is that I remember a head turning separately from the chair. That may be memory adding detail. At 9 or 10, I did not stand there analyzing which parts moved. I saw something human-shaped react, then ran. Over years, the brief movement became a clear person turning to look. I cannot be certain the original image was as detailed as it feels now. The basement darkness also affected depth. The bright computer screen may have reduced our ability to see anything around it. When looking toward a light source, nearby dark objects become silhouettes. A person-shaped shadow could appear solid, even if it was made from several objects at different distances. The monitor image may have changed, causing the silhouette to shift. Our eyes were still adjusting after leaving the bright upstairs room. For the first few seconds in darkness, vision is unreliable. I had also entered expecting to be afraid. I was deliberately walking slowly while fighting the urge to run. My body was already tense. The first unexpected shape would have triggered panic. My cousin probably sensed my fear even though I tried to hide it. If I stopped suddenly, he would stop too. If I ran, he would run. This does not mean he did not see the figure. It means our reactions were not independent in the way two adults observing calmly might be. Still, I remember looking at him afterward and knowing he had seen something. He did not only run because I screamed. We both reacted to the movement. When we told our fathers, our descriptions matched. That shared memory has kept me from dismissing the entire incident. If I could speak to my cousin now, I would ask him to describe it without hearing my version first. Does he remember the computer being on? Does he remember a person in the chair? Did the figure turn? Does he connect it to the peeping Tom? His answers might show whether our memories remained similar or separated over time. He may not remember it at all. For me, the event became tied to my fear of the basement, so it stayed vivid. For him, it may have been one strange moment during a childhood visit. Even if he remembers the same thing, two children can share a mistaken perception. But confirmation would matter emotionally. I also wonder what my sister remembers about the man at her window. Did he look old or young? Was he wearing dark clothing? Did she see him clearly enough to describe his face? Was her window near an area that could lead to the basement? Did the adults search the property immediately? If the incidents happened on the same night, a connection would seem stronger. If they occurred days apart, it would remain possible, but less direct. At the time, no one appears to have linked them. The adults treated the basement sighting as children imagining a person. The peeping Tom was treated as a separate security problem. Only years later did I place them beside each other. That delay makes me cautious. A connection discovered later can feel meaningful because the mind wants it to be. There is no proof the figure and the man were the same person. But there is also no proof they were not. I no longer think of the incident as automatically paranormal. In some ways, a ghost is not even the most likely explanation. The possibilities range from harmless to terrifying. A rotating office chair and computer shadow. A coat arranged in a human shape. A visual mistake shared by two frightened children. A family member who moved before we reached the basement. A prank, or a real intruder sitting silently in the dark. The last possibility is the one that gives me chills. Not because it explains every detail perfectly, but because our property had already attracted people who tried to break in or watch through windows. There was a known human threat around that house. A man looking through my sister's bedroom window was not imagination. Someone had been close enough to see inside. If that person entered the basement, my cousin and I may have interrupted him. Perhaps he did not chase us, because the house was full of adults. He only needed to remain quiet and escape before anyone believed us. The family's disbelief could have helped him. We ran upstairs, shouting that someone was downstairs. Instead of immediately surrounding the house or calling police, the adults may have spent time telling us nobody could be there. Those minutes would be enough. A stranger could slip through a window, hide in another room, or leave through a door while everyone focused on calming us. By the time they searched, he was gone. That scenario is possible, but I do not know whether it happened. I do not want to turn an unclear childhood sighting into a definite attempted kidnapping or break-in. We never saw a weapon. The figure did not approach us. There was no evidence of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. The safest statement is that two children saw what looked like a person sitting at a computer in a dark basement. The figure turned toward them. When adults checked, no person was found. The peeping Tom occurred during the same family visit, which may or may not have been connected. That is all I can honestly claim. Nothing else paranormal happened in that house. The basement never produced another figure. The computer did not turn on by itself again, at least not that I remember. No one heard voices from downstairs. If the event had been supernatural, it was a single appearance without any wider pattern. That makes a human or visual explanation more likely. But isolated experiences can be difficult precisely because there is no pattern. If something happens once, there is no chance to prepare equipment, compare conditions, or gather evidence. You have only a few seconds of fear and whatever memory remains afterward. I still picture the staircase, the bright room upstairs behind us, the darkness below, me pretending not to be frightened because my cousin was watching, the slow descent instead of my usual run. Then the computer glow revealing the office chair, a dark body sitting there, the head turning, both of us running. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had followed my normal habit. If I had sprinted down the stairs alone, I might have reached the switch before noticing the figure. The basement lights would have come on. Maybe I would have seen an empty chair with a coat on it and laughed. Or I might have found a real man sitting only a few feet away. Because my cousin was there, I walked slowly enough to see into the room before reaching the bottom. Trying to look brave may have given us time to notice the danger. That thought has always stayed with me. We did not turn on the light. We did not go closer. We ran. Years later, when I remembered the man outside my sister's window during the same trip, the memory changed. The figure no longer seemed like a vague ghost in a childhood basement. It became a possible person. Someone who may have been watching the house. Someone who may have entered while the adults were distracted. Someone sitting in the dark, using the glow of our computer, who turned when two children appeared on the stairs. There may be no connection at all. I hope there is not. I would rather believe we saw a chair turn in the shifting light. But whenever I imagine the figure now, I no longer wonder whether it was a ghost. I wonder whether it was the same man who later stood outside my sister's bedroom window. And I wonder how long he had already been inside our house before we found him. This happened about 15 years ago, when I was living in a flat in a quiet part of town. The area was not completely isolated, but it was peaceful enough that unusual people or sounds tended to stand out. The path leading toward our building did not connect to many other places. If someone walked along it, there was a good chance they were heading toward the flats. One afternoon, I was walking home when I noticed the man behind me. He was far enough away that I could not see his face or clothing clearly. I only noticed that he was moving in the same direction as me. At first, I did not think much about it. People sometimes take the same route, and there was no reason to assume he was following me. I continued walking at my normal pace. When I reached the flat, the man was still some distance behind. I went inside before I could see where he eventually went. He might have entered another flat, turned around, or continued somewhere I did not know about. Although there was not much else along the path, it was still possible that he had a normal reason to be there. The moment seemed too unimportant to remember. Later, however, I would think about that man repeatedly. That night, I locked my bedroom door before going to sleep. My room had a simple lock that used a single key. I kept that key with me inside the bedroom, so once the door was locked, none of my flatmates should have been able to enter. I had no particular reason to feel unsafe. Locking the bedroom was simply part of my normal routine. Sometime during the night, I woke suddenly. The clock showed exactly 3 a.m. I had the strong impression that something had just been thrown across the room. The sound reminded me of a pillow hitting the floor or wall. It was soft, but heavy enough to wake me, like fabric filled with something landing nearby. I sat up and looked around. The room was dark, and I could not immediately see anything out of place. My pillows seemed to be where they should have been. Nothing obvious lay on the floor. The door was still closed. I listened for footsteps or movement outside. There was nothing. Because I had been asleep, I could not be certain the sound had really happened. It might have been part of a dream or a normal noise from elsewhere in the flat that my half-awake mind interpreted as something inside the room. I checked the time again, settled back down, and eventually went to sleep. The next night, it happened again. I woke abruptly at exactly 3 a.m. Once more, I felt certain that the sound of a pillow being thrown had pulled me out of sleep. There was a soft impact somewhere in the bedroom, followed by silence. I turned on a light and checked the room more carefully. Nothing appeared to have moved. The door remained locked. The key was still inside with me. I began wondering whether one of my pillows had slipped while I was sleeping, though I could not find one on the floor. Maybe I had moved suddenly and struck the mattress or wall with my arm. Old buildings also make noises at night. Pipes shift. Floorboards settle. Neighbors drop things. A sound traveling through a wall can seem as though it came from only a few feet away. The fact that I woke at 3 again was strange, but it could have been coincidence. My body may also have started waking at that time out of habit. Once a person notices a particular hour, they become more likely to remember waking then. On the third night, the same thing happened. Exactly 3 a.m. The same soft, forceful sound. The same immediate feeling that something had been thrown through the darkness. By then, I was properly unsettled. I checked the lock before going to sleep each night. I made sure the door shut fully and turned the key myself. No one else had access to it. There was no way for a flatmate to quietly enter, throw something, and leave without unlocking the door from the inside. The window was another possible entry point, but it was not somewhere a person could easily reach without being seen or making noise. There was also no sign that anyone had touched it. I began searching the room each morning. I looked beneath the bed, behind furniture, and inside the wardrobe. I checked whether any loose object could fall during the night. Nothing explained the sound. The fourth night was the same. Then the fifth. Then the sixth. For 6 consecutive nights, I woke dead on 3 in the morning. Each time, I believed a pillow had just been thrown across the room. I never actually saw one moving. That detail is important. I would wake after the sound, not before it. I was always coming out of sleep, disoriented, and trying to understand what had happened. It is entirely possible that there was no object moving at all. The sound may have existed only in the moment between dreaming and waking. Some people experience sudden imaginary noises as they fall asleep or wake. They hear bangs, crashes, footsteps, voices, or doors slamming even though nothing physical caused them. At the time, I did not know much about sleep disturbances. I only knew that the same event was happening at the same hour every night. The repetition made it feel intentional. I began wondering whether the man I had seen on the path had followed me to the building. Maybe he had watched which flat I entered. Perhaps he had found a way inside and was moving around while everyone slept. But that did not fit the locked bedroom, even if a stranger entered the flat. He could not get through my door without forcing it or using another key. I would have noticed damage. There was also no proof that the man had even approached the building. He might have been an ordinary neighbor. Connecting him to the noises may have been my mind trying to create an explanation. I did not tell myself the flat was haunted. I was only a little creeped out. Nothing had touched me, and nothing in the room had visibly changed. A strange noise at night was not enough to make me leave. After the 6th night, the disturbances stopped. I slept through 3 in the morning without waking. The following nights were normal too. About a week passed. The fear began fading. I assumed the episode had been caused by stress, poor sleep, or some repeated noise from the building that had since stopped. Maybe a neighbor had been working unusual hours and dropping something each night. Perhaps heating or plumbing equipment activated at 3 and produced a soft bang. Once it stopped, there seemed no reason to keep thinking about it. Then, one day, I returned home and found the front door open. Not slightly loose in the frame. Open, I stopped outside and looked into the flat. Nothing immediately appeared damaged. I did not hear movement from inside, but an open front door was still wrong. I entered carefully and found one of my flatmates. I asked whether they had left it open. They said no. According to them, they had locked it after coming inside. Then they added that perhaps it had not closed properly. That was possible. A door can look shut without the latch catching. A draft, vibration, or slight movement can push it open later. It could have been an ordinary mistake. Still, I felt uneasy. The memory of waking at 3 returned immediately. I went toward my bedroom. The door was closed. I unlocked or opened it, expecting the room to look the way I had left it. Instead, almost everything had been moved. The furniture had been rotated 180 degrees. The room seemed reversed. Pieces that had faced one direction now faced the opposite way. It was not as though a chair had been nudged or a table moved slightly for cleaning. Someone had deliberately turned the furniture around. My smaller possessions had been collected and piled in the center of the room. Objects from around the bedroom had been taken from their usual places and stacked together. The bed, furniture, and scattered belongings had all been rearranged while I was away. I stood in the doorway trying to understand what I was seeing. It was too much work to be accidental. A person would have needed time. Furniture does not rotate by itself. Objects from different parts of a room do not gather into a pile because of a draft, vibration, or plumbing problem. Someone had entered. That was the first thought that made sense. But the door had been locked when I left. I kept the only key I knew about. There was no sign that the lock had been broken. If one of my flatmates had done it as a joke, they would have needed access to the room and enough time to move everything. The prank would also have been extreme. Turning all the furniture and piling up my property was not a quick joke. It would have required effort and planning. I questioned the people I lived with. No one admitted doing it. Perhaps they were lying. A group prank is one of the most reasonable explanations. A flatmate could have copied the key without telling me, or discovered another way to unlock the door. Someone may have wanted to frighten me after hearing about the 3 o'clock noises, but I do not remember telling everyone enough for them to build a prank around it. Even if they knew, moving an entire room while leaving the door apparently secure was far beyond what I expected from them. The open front door made the situation more serious. If it had not latched properly, an outsider could have entered. The person may have gone through the flat while no one was paying attention and found a way into my room. Locks are not always as secure as people believe. A simple bedroom lock can sometimes be opened with basic tools, another key, or something thin inserted near the latch. A determined intruder might enter without leaving obvious damage. The man from the path came back into my mind. What if he had followed me home that first afternoon? Maybe he had watched the building over the following nights. Perhaps the sounds at 3 were attempts to frighten me, test whether I was awake, or make me believe someone was in the bedroom. But how could he have caused those sounds through a locked door? Maybe he had already entered before I locked it and hidden somewhere inside. I had searched the room, but a person can hide in places someone checks poorly, especially if that person does not truly expect to find anyone. That possibility was terrifying. For 6 nights, I might have slept while someone concealed themselves nearby. They could have thrown a pillow, waited for me to wake, then remained silent. But there were serious problems with that theory. The room was not large enough for someone to live hidden inside for 6 consecutive nights without being discovered. They would need food, water, and a way to leave. I would have noticed signs. The bedroom door was locked from the inside while I slept, so an intruder would be trapped with me unless they had another exit. There was no evidence. That happened. A person outside the room could have produced the sound through the wall or door. They might throw something in the neighboring room at exactly 3, making it seem like the impact came from my bedroom. If the walls were thin, I could easily misjudge the direction. One of my flatmates might have stayed awake and done it as a joke. The fact that it happened at the same precise time suggests a scheduled source. An appliance, pipe, neighbor, or person could cause a repeated sound at 3 each morning. My half-asleep brain may have turned it into the image of a pillow flying across the room. That is probably the simplest explanation for the 6 nights. The rearranged bedroom may have been a separate event. A flatmate's prank or a burglary could have happened a week later, and fear connected the two. Human beings naturally build patterns from frightening experiences. First, I noticed a stranger on the path. Then I woke repeatedly at 3. Then I found the front door open. Finally, my room had been rearranged. Placed together, the events looked like a progression. Someone followed me. They entered at night. They tested me for 6 days. Then they returned and changed the room. But each event may have had its own ordinary cause. The man was walking to another flat. The sounds were caused by the building or sleep hallucinations. The front door failed to latch. My flatmates moved the furniture as a prank. That combination is possible. Yet the final scene made the earlier nights impossible for me to ignore. When I looked at the reversed room, I felt as though whatever had been waking me wanted to prove it could enter. For 6 nights, I heard movement, but found nothing. Then, the disturbances stopped. A week later, the whole room had changed while I was gone. The pile in the center looked deliberate. It was not vandalism in the normal sense. Nothing was simply smashed or stolen, at least not that I remember. The purpose appeared to be showing control. Someone wanted me to know they had been inside. The furniture being rotated made the room feel familiar and wrong at the same time. A bed or desk facing the opposite direction changes how a space feels immediately. The doorway, windows, and corners are all seen from unfamiliar angles. It was my bedroom, but it no longer felt like mine. I did not stay another night. I did not wait for the person to return or for the 3 o'clock sounds to begin again. Whether the cause was a cruel flatmate, a stranger, or something I could not explain, the room no longer felt safe. I left. Looking back, I think a human explanation is more likely than anything supernatural. The rearrangement required physical effort. A person moved those objects. The question is who? One of my flatmates could have had a duplicate key. Landlords and property managers often retain keys to rented rooms, even when tenants believe they hold the only copy. A former tenant might also have kept one. Someone connected to the building could have entered without forcing the lock. The front door being open may indicate that a person with access had recently left in a hurry or failed to close it. The furniture could have been moved by the landlord, maintenance staff, or another resident for reasons that were never explained. But why pile my belongings in the center? Why rotate everything rather than move only what was necessary? There had been no warning about repairs or inspections. No one claimed responsibility. A landlord entering secretly would already be serious, but the way the room was arranged suggested intimidation rather than maintenance. The flatmates remain obvious suspects. They lived close enough to observe my routines and knew when I would be away. They could work together to move heavy furniture. They could also keep denying it because my frightened reaction made the prank successful. People sometimes continue jokes much longer than expected once they realize admitting the truth will make them look cruel. Maybe years later, one of them would confess. At the time, however, I had no reason to trust that explanation. If they were willing to enter my locked room and move everything, I did not feel safe living with them either. The man on the path may have had no connection. I only saw him once and never identified him. It is possible he lived nearby or was visiting someone in the building. The fact that there was little else down the path made his direction seem strange, but he may have turned before reaching the flats after I went inside. I did not see him attempt to enter. I did not see him again. Fear gave him a role in the story because he was the only unknown person I remembered from before the disturbances. Still, I cannot completely dismiss him. If he had been watching me, he would know where I lived. The open front door later showed that access to the flat was possible. The room's lock may have been easy to bypass. Someone interested in frightening or stalking me could have entered while I was away and rearranged the space. The exact purpose would remain unclear. Nothing valuable being stolen might suggest the person was not a normal burglar. They may have wanted to frighten me or prove they could reach me. That possibility makes leaving immediately seem like the correct decision. The 6 nights at 3 could also have been connected psychologically rather than physically. Maybe I had subconsciously noticed the man following me and felt unsafe afterward. That anxiety disrupted my sleep. I woke at the same time because the body often repeats sleeping patterns once they begin. The imagined pillow sound may have been a hypnopompic hallucination, an intense sound created while waking. After several nights, I expected it, which made another episode more likely. Then the episode stopped naturally. A week later, a real intruder or prankster rearranged the room. The two events became connected in memory because both involve feeling watched and unsafe. This explanation allows the night sounds to be internal while treating the final incident as real. It is plausible. But there is one detail I still find difficult. Why 3 in the morning exactly for 6 nights? People often say they woke at exactly 3 when they actually saw times like 2:57, 3:03, or 3:10 and remembered them as the same hour. My memory may have simplified it. I might have checked a digital clock that was only accurate to the nearest minute and seen slightly different times. The repetition could feel more exact now than it was. Even so, it happened often enough that I noticed a pattern while it was still occurring. The pillow sound is equally uncertain. I never confirmed that a pillow moved. I did not wake to find one across the room. The impression was simply strong enough that I swore that was what I heard. Perhaps a cushion in another flat hit a wall each night. Maybe someone returned from work at that hour and threw a bag onto a bed, The same routine could produce the same sound through shared walls. No mystery would be required. But after seeing my entire room reversed, those explanations stopped feeling reassuring. A repeated sound in darkness is easy to dismiss when the room looks normal in daylight. Once the furniture had moved, I could no longer tell myself the space was untouched. Someone had crossed the boundary of the locked door. Even if the nightly sounds were unrelated, the danger was real. I sometimes wonder whether the person entered more than once. Maybe they had been inside during the 6 nights, but did not move anything obvious. Perhaps the sound came from them dropping or throwing a pillow while I slept. They may have stood in a dark corner and watched me wake. Then they left through a route I never discovered. That idea requires hidden access to the room, which seems unlikely, but old flats can contain strange features. A connecting door covered by furniture, an accessible window, a loose ceiling panel, or a shared storage space could allow entry. I never conducted a detailed investigation because I left so quickly. There may have been a simple structural explanation I never found. Part of me regrets not involving the police or documenting the room. Photographs might have shown exactly how everything was positioned. Fingerprints or damage to the lock could have supported an intruder theory. Neighbors might have seen someone entering the building. A landlord could have confirmed whether duplicate keys existed. At the time, I was focused only on leaving. I did not want to spend another evening inside while waiting to find out whether someone would return. The fact that nothing was apparently stolen may have made authorities less interested, but unauthorized entry and deliberate rearrangement were still serious. I wish I had treated it as possible stalking rather than only something strange. If a person had targeted me, they might have moved on to someone else. Then again, perhaps reporting it would have revealed that a flatmate had organized the whole thing. An ordinary explanation might have ended the fear. Instead, the uncertainty remained. I never experienced anything similar after leaving. No one followed me to another home. I stopped waking at 3 to the sound of a pillow moving. My furniture remained where I left it. That strongly suggests the cause was connected to the flat or the people living there, not something attached to me. If it had been paranormal, it did not follow. If it had been a stalker, they either lost interest or did not know where I moved. If it was a prank, leaving ended it. I still think that walking away was the safest choice. The experience has stayed with me because it developed so quietly. There was no dramatic attack. The man behind me never ran or threatened me. The sounds at night were soft. The front door might only have failed to close. Each individual event was easy to dismiss. Then I opened the bedroom door and saw that someone had physically transformed the room. All the earlier uncertainty became threatening at once. I picture the man on the path sometimes. He was too far away to identify, walking in the direction of the flats where there was little else to visit. I reached home before him and never saw whether he came inside. Maybe he turned away and had nothing to do with anything. Maybe he had already noticed me. I also picture those 6 nights, the sudden waking, the clock showing 3, the soft impact in the darkness, me turning on the light and finding no proof. Then, the week of silence. It almost felt like a pause before the final event. I came home. The front door was open. My flatmate said it had been locked, but might not have closed properly. I went to my bedroom. The furniture faced the wrong direction. My belongings sat in a pile in the center of the floor. The locked room had been entered and rearranged without an explanation. I never stayed another night because I understood one thing clearly. Whether it was a stranger, someone I lived with, or something I still cannot explain, whatever had access to my bedroom knew exactly how to make sure I would notice. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.